Good afternoon or good morning, I guess, depending on where you are in the US. Thanks for joining us for today's session. Edge is very excited to host this session. Still on the clock, ADA Title II compliance and the policy gap in higher education. Looking at what we can do with this extra year of compliance readiness time that has been given on these new updates. I am Adam Scarzafava, VP for Marketing, Business Development, and Edge Events here at Edge. I get the fun job of engaging with our members and participating institutions all across the country. I'm going to start with just a little bit of information on Edge up top before I let Dr. Romeo run with the bulk of today's content. So just so that everyone is aware. Edge is a nonprofit. We're a member-based research and education network and a technology consortium. We were founded out of New Jersey, founded by the New Jersey President's Council for Higher Ed. So we're technically owned by a group of higher ed presidents. So we really have that mission and that higher ed support at the core of what we do. But we have expanded in who we serve and how we serve. And man, these slides, this slide in particular, needed to be updated, and I missed that one because we now have institutions participating with us in 30 states and counting. Really excited to be able to help institutions all across the country in a number of different areas that I'll talk about. We do that because we really come from the higher ed community. We have that mission and we have expertise on staff that focuses on driving results and outcomes that institutions need. In this case, the outcome being, serving students better through digital accessibility, and all that entails. But we really focus whatever we're helping institutions with on a customized, specific approach that institutions need because everybody's a little bit different. Everybody's facing a little bit of a different challenge. Everybody needs a little bit of a different outcome, and we know that because we come from the higher ed world. We do that in a number of different ways. EdgeNet is literally and figuratively the backbone of the organization. It's a purpose-built optical fiber network that higher ed institutions plug into to get internet connectivity to do all the wonderful things they need to do with the internet, whether that is the day-to-day education for students, services students might be using in dorms and recreationally, or whether that's high-powered, high-performance, high-speed research. All happens on EdgeNet. Edge Discovery is that technology-based framework that we offer to accelerate research. Edge Market is a strategic and informed consortium procurement arm of what we do. We operate a cooperative pricing system on behalf of institutions across the country. Lots of those institutions that have joined from those 30 states and counting have joined to get access to a variety of different contracts that we have available via that co-op. We do events, networking, and community building, just like what we're doing here today, but we host live conferences as well at member campuses in New Jersey. So if you have the opportunity to get out to New Jersey and join us at one of those conferences, whether you're based in the state or not, we would love for you to come join us and meet the Edge team and community. And we offer thought leadership and solution development ourselves as a nonprofit in digital transformation support, cybersecurity, cloud strategy, and instructional design, online teaching and learning space. As I mentioned, we're always focused on solving for challenges that member institutions are having. And some of the areas where we've had an opportunity to do that lately are AI, obviously a big question for institutions across the country. We're focused on governance, data, making data useful, road mapping, and strategic guidance and planning for institutions. In the cybersecurity space, we do a lot of compliance-based work there around whether it's NIST, GLBA, CMMC for research, or making sure that institutions meet what they need to do to be compliant for cyber insurance. We do a lot of work, and this is Laura and her team as well, in supporting course development, evaluations, and particularly lately looking at some of these credential and certificate-based programs that are becoming more and more popular and more in demand. So we have the ability to support those efforts and help to launch those efforts and optimize those efforts from an instructional design standpoint. And then what we're all here to talk about today, and with this I'll get out of the way, but digital accessibility compliance has been a huge and growing area of practice for our team. Dr. Romeo leads those efforts, and we will now. I'll stop sharing my screen, and Dr. Romeo will get into today's content that you all really came to see. So, Laura, the floor is yours.
Great. Let me set myself up, and we will get going. Okay, just as a quick check, we can see this. Oh,
Yes.
okay, great.
And you're full screen, so you're good to go. And a quick reminder before Dr. Romeo gets going, use the chat and use the Q&A. Let's do it.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Romeo, and I'm really glad that you're here to join us today. I feel like this is one of those topics that can feel heavy pretty quickly, so I'm going to keep this practical and straightforward. Um, a lot of you have probably heard pieces of this conversation from a variety of different places, the compliance standpoint, IT, your web teams, academic affairs, instructional design, procurement, all over the place, right? So my goal today is to help pull all of that together a little bit more so that it just feels manageable. We will talk about what the extension with Title II actually means, where institutions tend to get stuck, and why policy is such a big part of this work. And I do want to leave some room for next steps because the point here is not just to understand the issue better, it's also to know what to do with that information. So, why this matters now? I've noticed that when the deadline moved and everything got extended out a year, a lot of institutions felt that pressure release. And honestly, it makes a lot of sense. But I also noticed that in a lot of places, the momentum started to slow down right after that. I saw it in small ways. A working group skipped a meeting because they now have time. A department decided to revisit the content later and prioritize their time for another project that was on their plate. A project that was supposed to be moving kind of gets quietly pushed to next semester or next month. So none of that really seems kind of dramatic on its own, but it does add up pretty quickly. So the extension gave more time. However, it did not change the expectation behind the compliance standpoint. So the question now is not whether this still matters. Of course it does. The question is what your institution is now doing with the additional time that we have. So I just want you to pause before I move on and take a second and think about where your work with accessibility actually is right now on your campus. When the extension was granted, what kept moving and what might have stalled? And then last, reflect on where might it be kind of mostly waiting for someone else to pick it back up and keep it going. That context right there matters as we move into the rest of this session together. So I'd like to start with just a quick roadmap so that you know where we're heading. By the end of today, I want you to have a clear sense of what the extension means and what it does not mean, what the common compliance gaps look like right now, and just what a meaningful accessibility policy should include, as well as where your institution might still have some exposure. This is not meant to be a legal deep dive. It's really just more of a strategy conversation. So the goal is to kind of help you look at your own institution a little bit more clearly and maybe come to the table with a little bit more honesty. So keep this question in mind as we go. If someone asked you where your institution is the strongest on accessibility, would you be able to answer that pretty quickly? That's just the kind of clarity that we're aiming for today. So, what the extension changes and what it doesn't. This is, I think, where some institutions can possibly get the wrong message. As I mentioned before, the deadline changed, but the obligation did not. So, yes, the extension gives institutions more time to plan, more time to prioritize and organize the work better. And that truly does matter, and it allows you to move in the right direction. But what it does not mean is that inaccessible content is now suddenly fine. It doesn't mean that teams can step away and come back later without having consequences. So, if anything, I would urge you that the extra time should be used for the parts that are easy to delay, which might include your governance, policy, ownership, as well as prioritization and documentation. So, this is really where you'll want to focus your energy in the upcoming months and build those sustainable practices. Before we move on, I have found that a common pattern is that when people hear more time, you just might mentally move the issue down the list. Maybe a team says, "Oh, I'll get back to it after this next hiring cycle," or maybe after a platform migration, maybe after they finish a different initiative that has also been taking up their time. And I understand why that happens. It happens to me too in my job as well. But that right there, that mentality is exactly how the momentum gets lost. Um, and similar conversations with institutions who are navigating this, I've seen a couple of different reactions. Honestly, a lot is relief. We were into March, the beginning stages of April, and you could just feel, even through Zoom, the pressure that everyone was feeling under. And so that is completely understandable. One side is the relief that comes with the additional time. The other is, well, we were already behind, so what is this going to change? So both are very understandable perspectives. Um, the next move here, regardless of what camp you were in or are still finding yourself in, is to turn whatever reaction you have had into a plan. That's really going to be the important shift here. So, where are institutions getting stuck? What I usually notice is that institutions are not stuck because people don't care. They tend to get stuck because the work is spread out across a lot of different people. It's given to a lot of different teams and groups. And generally, when that happens, nobody has the full picture of what's going on or what needs to happen. Um, Compliance officers are tracking the risk. Web teams are trying to keep things running. IT is dealing with systems. The instructional design team are supporting the teaching and learning on the campus. And academic affairs is just trying to keep that learning going. So when this is happening in practice, as I mentioned, that web team might be fixing page templates. The instructional design team is reviewing that course content. And then you have your procurement that's handling a new vendor contract. So everyone is doing something with accessibility on the forefront of their mind, but again, they're losing that whole picture. So when leadership then asks where the institution stands as far as where we are with accessibility and our work toward, meeting compliance and making sure that all of our students, faculty, and staff can engage in the way that they need to with the digital content that we're publishing, that answer can get really fuzzy pretty quickly. You know what you're in charge of, but you might not know what someone else is in charge of, and that might have a pretty big impact. So, all of these teams that I mentioned are doing really good work. The problem, again, is that good work can still be disconnected work. So, the institution can be busy, but still not have a clear path forward. So, that's the pattern that I urge you to keep in mind because it shows up again in other issues as well. One of the most common signs of this is when a question gets bounced around a few different departments or across different teams before anyone can actually say who owns it. So that usually tells you that the problem is not within your technical side, it's going to be more about your organizational side. Some common compliance gaps right now. Again, with the work that we're doing, there are a few patterns that I keep seeing. One is going to be inaccessible documents and forms that are still in active use, especially if you consider those older PDFs that might not have gotten folded into your accessibility remediation plan. Another is uneven practices across your web and course content where some areas are making progress and others might still be creating barriers without even realizing it. A common example here is where one team cleans up a full set of PDFs and another team is working on course files. And then you have a third group who assumes that vendor review and has all of these accessibility pieces covered. So on paper, a lot is happening, but in practice, your institution might still not have a clear view of what's being done. There's, no collaboration, no communication outside of what is in progress. And so you're leaving possible gaps to be exposed. This can really show up in everyday ways. A student might try to use a form that looks fine until they reach the keyboard navigation. A faculty member might upload slides that just pass through a course shell without any review, with large accessibility issues embedded in that file. A new software purchase goes live because the functionality works and it's meeting a problem. It's creating the solution, but maybe no one really actually tested the accessibility side in a realistic use case. So these are again areas where you'll see small gaps created that might be overlooked, and they do kind of build and add up. I also have seen where institutions kind of get stuck in where this compliance gap happens in just weak governance around remediation. So you have issues, but maybe there isn't a clean way that has been how to prioritize those issues, who to assign those issues to, and how to track them over time. And then, of course, there's the procurement side of everything. Vendor tools and third-party platforms really can create a lot of risk if accessibility is not being addressed from the start, as well as if you already have a platform or a tool that is being used right now on your institution. If that has not been reviewed for accessibility issues, and then having those conversations with the vendor to create that co-accountability of we know what needs to be addressed, how are we going to solve this problem? So most institutions do not have a remediation problem first. This is a really big point because I have found that once you know that there's an issue, we're just going to jump straight to fixing it. It's an easy jump to fix things, and absolutely yes, remediation matters, but remediation first thinking can keep institutions in kind of a cycle where every issue might get handled as a one-off. It becomes reactive. And then whenever compliance is in question or new standards are produced, you find yourself in this same cycle 2 to 3 years down the road, where you're putting a lot of pressure on X amount of teams, and you're finding yourself in the same position that you found yourself in a year ago. Um, I found that a really common version of this is when the same issue just keeps showing up. So again, you have one office who is remediating a document, but the underlying process for creating documents never changes. So those issues are continuously getting baked into the creation process of it rather than training and addressing maybe the knowledge gap of how to navigate and be proactive in a document that is already accessible. Another example here is when one department gets to help with course files, but then next semester the same problems come back around because there's no shared practice in place. Again, those collaborative conversations aren't happening and the work is staying in silos. Um, when I am working with an accessibility task force, a lot of the members generally do know what needs to be fixed, especially when it's their own work that they're owning. But again, the roadblock tends to be that they don't have a clean way to organize the work. So that's where policy starts to matter in a deeper way. Policy gives that work a home to live. It gives people a common framework. It's going to help the institution move from, again, being reactive and reacting to problems to being proactive and managing problems in a more repeatable way, building in the culture to sustain these kinds of practices so that, again, you're not finding yourself in this cyclical pattern. So the real issue is not whether institutions know that there's work to do. Most teams do. The issue is whether the institution has a structure put in place that helps work move forward in that sustainable way. And I think that this is the piece that tends to separate short-term activity from long-term progress. And again, the practice of putting accessibility as a priority and ensuring that all students can succeed in their digital learning environment. So, what policy actually does? So, I like to keep this pretty plain. Policy defines scope, assigns responsibility, sets standards, and supports accountability. But it does also need procedures behind it. So, I think that you can build a great policy, but if you are missing the procedural side of it, then again, you might find yourself with a gap. So, policy tells people what the institution expects and who is responsible in very broad terms. And then you have procedure that tells people how the work actually moves. It should explain how issues get reported, how they get reviewed, how they are triaged and prioritized, how remediation gets tracked, and when something needs to be escalated for a decision to be made. So without that, policy can sound really good, but still be extremely hard to use. So I think a good way to think about this is that policy might say accessibility issues will be reviewed and addressed through the institution's governance process. Procedure here after the policy is the part that then says who receives the issue, what happens first, who decides whether or not it's urgent, and how it's going to get closed out. That distinction matters a lot once people are actually trying to use the policy that's put in place. So, if you're thinking about your own institution, the question here is pretty simple. One, do we have a policy? And does that policy tell people what to do? And then on the other side, for the support of the policy, do we have procedures? And do those procedures show people how the work actually gets done? So I think that's what makes this usable in real life. So, what does a meaningful accessibility policy actually include? While I have been working in this realm, I've helped several institutions build and or revise their policy. So when that work occurs, there are a few things that I want to put in place first. First, we consider the scope. So what content and systems are being covered? Second, we look at the standards. What do accessible practices look like in real life? And then third, we want to think about the roles in the governance. Again, who is making those decisions? Who owns what? And who's going to get pulled in when there's a problem? Um, I also like to include procurement and vendor expectations within policy just to make sure that it's thorough because these decisions can create accessibility problems before a project even gets going off the ground. Um, as well as when we're building out policy or revising a policy that's already put in place. We also try to consider including the monitoring side as well as continuous improvement so that the policy document doesn't just sit there as a statement. It actually gets to live in practice. And this is again where procedure really belongs to. So the policy should include procedures for implementation, escalation, and review. There should be a clear intake process for when issues arise or if they're, being made aware, as well as a way to triage and prioritize those issues. There should be a process for moving remediation forward, as well as a defined path for review when something does need attention from leadership or maybe another decision maker in the process. So, in other words, the policy says what the institution expects, and the procedure shows how that expectation actually works. Um, Before we move on, just to kind of make this more concrete. So, here's what this can look like in practice. A faculty member spots a PDF that is hard to use and submits it through the institution's intake process. From there, someone takes that and reviews it and then decides whether or not this is going to be a quick fix or whether it needs a larger remediation plan. Another question that they might ask is whether it needs to be escalated because maybe it affects a whole course or a whole department. Or perhaps it's something that's circulated around the entire institution. So if it is bigger, it's going to go to the person or the group who has that decision-making responsibility. And once it's fixed, there should be some sort of review so that the issue is closed, and the same problem doesn't continue to keep resurfacing. That's the kind of procedure. That's the kind of thing that procedure is meant to support. Again, it's going to give the policy a way to move. You're going to see progress and real goals being met when you have these two working together and when your policy is strong. So again, this is kind of the whole thing that makes this usable. Without the procedure, people can still know that policy exists, but just kind of be stuck on what to do next. So, for a quick readiness check, I want this one to feel more like a self check, not a quiz. So, ask yourself these questions. Do we know what is in scope? Do we know who owns the work? Do we know where we are most exposed? And do we have a policy that actually guides decisions? Last question is, do we have procedures that help the work move in a real and repeatable way? If some of these questions are hard to answer, or maybe you're left thinking, I'm not sure. That's okay. I have found that that's honestly where a lot of institutions kind of live for a while before this work starts to move. And in my experience, honest answers to these questions. So if you're finding yourself not knowing the answer or feeling like, perhaps the position that you currently are in feels not as strong, not as repeatable, these honest answers to these five questions are often going to be the most useful starting point because once people recognize and understand that the structure that's in place maybe needs to be clearer than it currently is, you can start to actually organize the work. You can start to build out answers to these questions. And again, as you find your answers, you'll recognize that you're moving yourself forward. So I'm going to pause here and just want you to take a second and think about where your institution feels the strongest with accessibility. And now I'd also like for you to consider where it still feels like it is maybe mostly improvising. You're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants, hoping that things will work out down the road. So I think whatever thoughts are being held in your head, that kind of honest read right now is just a really good place to start. You can take these thoughts into a conversation this week to say, okay, I recognize that we're here, and I think that we should start asking ourselves these things so that we can move and be here. This work is really going to impact and benefit your approach, as well as your uh, long-term goals for ensuring that one, compliance is met, but two, again, that you're making your digital environment a place where no matter who's coming in with what need, that they can access it without either getting frustrated, quitting, or having to ask for some sort of other guidance or a different path because it's already been addressed. So, if I were kind of simplifying the next phase here, I would put it in a few moves. So that's what this slide is about. I would start with inventory, but I will preface that by saying don't try to inventory everything all at once. It's a lot, and that could get extremely overwhelming and leave one to think there's no way this is going to happen. I would focus on the highest risk as well as the highest visibility areas first, and then I would prioritize what matters now and what can follow later. Um, a roadmap here is helpful because it keeps people from trying to solve everything at the same time. For example, if you have an institution and they've decided that they're going to start with their public facing web pages and the most used PDFs, then they'll move into course files, then vendor review, and then policy and staff training kind of in parallel. That's the kind of sequencing that makes the work feel less overwhelming, as well as gives leadership a very clear sense of where the effort is going. It's also going to create the feeling of I can achieve this for the people who are putting in the work. After that, I would clarify governance. Make sure that people know who's involved and how those decisions are going to get made. Once that's in place, you're going to want to strengthen the policy layer so that the work has a home, as I mentioned before. And just as important, again, when you're building or remediating your policy, you'll want to also build or revise the procedures that are making that policy usable. So, coming back to the intake, escalation, review, and follow up steps that are going to keep this work moving. The goal is to move from one-off fixes and again being, reactive to something that becomes more repeatable. That's what's going to make this work sustainable. That's what's going to start having an impact on the culture of your institution and how they're approaching accessible practices, as well as probably starting to fill the knowledge gap that might be present on um, faculty and staff, leadership might not know what they don't know. So this is going to be work to put in place that, again, will move the needle toward compliance, but also ensure that practices are being put into place to ensure student success in your digital environment. So what you can do next. So this is the part where I kind of want to try to connect the dots without overcomplicating it. Most institutions can start by just identifying where the gaps are and getting a basic inventory in place. That's going to be really useful work and it's certainly worth doing. So if you are finding yourself not knowing where you stand as far as compliance with accessibility, you're definitely going to want to do an audit first. And once you find that you've kind of moved into the readiness assessment, your remediation planning, your policy and procedure development, addressing those knowledge gaps through training, considering the governance structure, that's usually where outside support can really help, especially considering, everything that's already on somebody's plate, team's plates, department's plates, and generally, a third party outside perspective sometimes creates a lot more buy-in than somebody that's overhead saying, okay, here's another thing extra that you can do. Um, Speaking on the readiness assessment that I mentioned, this is just really useful because it's going to give you a real picture of where you stand, not just a general sense that there's a lot to do. It's going to show you where your gaps are, help you separate those urgent issues from the ones that you can maybe place further down the road as longer term issues to address, and just generally give you a place to start. So, you may find, for example, that your public web presence is in much better shape than your LMS course materials, or that your internal teams are completely aligned with compliance goals, but your procurement process is still really leaving you exposed. So that kind of information is just useful because it's going to change what you as an institution wants to tackle first. And then a remediation roadmap really matters because it turns that snapshot of where your institution is with the gaps that you might be needing to address into a plan. So instead of just saying, oh, well, here are the problems, it helps you think through, again, what needs to be prioritized. So what gets fixed first? What might need more time to be addressed? What needs coordination among multiple departments or teams, and where the institution may need more support. So this remediation roadmap is especially helpful when you are dealing with a lot of content, if you're dealing with a lot of systems, or even if you're dealing with a lot of people who might all think that someone else is handling it. For example, a roadmap might show that the institution should start with that public facing web template. And again, the most frequently used PDFs. So I know we've spoken on that before, but then, you'll want to move into that's where you have the highest issues, the ones that are complete roadblocks for students who are using screen readers, or for someone who is dealing with the way that they address their cognitive load. So addressing those first, and then maybe moving into your course files. Perhaps your faculty have a stronger understanding on how to create PowerPoints that have correct reading order, or how to have the heading structure already be set in place on a Word document. So again, maybe that priority is a lot lower because your risk isn't as high there, and not causing as many issues for those who are using it. So I think that, again, sequencing here just really matters, as you're prioritizing what to do next. Again, whether that's building the policy and procedure or jumping straight into remediation and assigning accountability and responsibility to whoever it has been tasked to. Um, this is just going to give the institution a very realistic path of how to navigate the documentation to say that you know what needs to be addressed and what needs to be fixed, and this is how I'm going to do it, and who's going to do it, as well as that time frame, rather than just having that long list of issues. Um, and then I would be remiss not to tell you about how Edge can support. So Edge's accessibility support is just really built around exactly these kind of needs. Looking at your third-party procurement, or what's already set in place, reviewing that, readiness assessments, creating remediation roadmap, and providing support in what your plan's going to look like. Customized training for faculty and staff, as well as, again, we're talking about policy and procedure. So, looking at what you might already have in place regarding that, or building something from scratch so that accessibility is baked in and it's prioritized. So, if today's session helped you kind of see that the challenge is bigger than just a quick fix, honestly, it's probably because it is, and that's okay. It just means that the next step should match the size of the work. So I would ask less, do we have a problem? And I would ask more, do we have the structure that is going to help us carry this work forward? That's going to be the real question that you should be searching for the answer for. Before we open it up for Q&A, I did just want to kind of end with a thought. What would it look like if your institution treated accessibility as just part of how it operates rather than an extra project? That's the shift that you're going to see really change the outcome over time. Again, if you can build the culture around, accessibility is just good work, right? It's just the right thing to do. So if you are feeling like this is a lot, or if you feel like you still have a lot to get done, in the next 8 to 9 months before the deadline hits, if you are feeling really proud of yourself because look at where you came from, and look at everything that your teams have been asked to do and have championed that work. Celebrate your milestones, celebrate your wins, and recognize that, again, this is good work that needs to happen to ensure, your students and your faculty and staff feel like they belong on your campus. I think, again, before I close, one last thought from me. In a lot of institutions, the hardest part sometimes becomes not knowing that the work matters. That's not the hardest part. The part that's hard is figuring out how to organize the work in a way that people can actually keep up with it. And again, it doesn't just feel like one more extra additional thing that we're being asked to do. So that being said, I will pause there. I see a couple of questions that have already been populated in the Q&A box. I haven't really been following the chat, so I'm not sure what's there. But Adam can help opening it
Yeah.
up for questions, reflections, if you want to share some examples from your own institution, we are a community here. I'm happy to hear, wins. And yes, so
Yeah, please share. That's what we're here for. So, um, we do have a couple questions coming in, and I think I will try and structure these from sort of big picture down to the more sort of targeted and specific. So,
but
uh,
sorry, Adam, before we do that, I forgot I had one more slide.
oh, good
Um,
call. Because these guys are excellent resources for anybody looking for support. So, of course, Laura is always available, and we'll share contact information for the full team that supports these efforts. But Michelle and Aaron are a great way to get access to all the resources that you need from within Edge. They're a great conduit to Laura and to help support all the ways that we engage with our members. So please don't hesitate to reach out to these two if you need any support or if you're looking for the content or any and can't find it or anything else. So yeah, good call, Laura. Thanks for not letting us forget that. So with that, we'll dive in, and I think this is a question that I know we've heard on a number of topics from institutions. So we're instructional designers and academic technologists designing digital accessibility training at a fairly small college. Our official scope for training is faculty and staff who support faculty, but we offer the training to any staff across the college who would find it useful. We know we want to track individuals' participation in training via our HRIS. What other policies do you recommend around training with the caveat that I don't think leaders have much appetite to mandate training, and we may offer optional challenges with badging and stuff like that?
Yeah, and I think it honestly depends on. So I've heard multiple conversations around this. Like how do we get our faculty and staff to buy in and kind of engage with building their skills so that again this doesn't just become remediation after remediation. I think it hinges on a few things. Is training allowed to be mandated? There are some governances that state not. And again, how do you want to address that? Do you want to say this is absolutely required work? Is that going to be well received? Or I like the idea of badges, certifications, and that's something that you can do internally. You can shout out champions of this work, and I find that people are like, "Oh, well, I want to shout out," and so you can kind of highlight those that are doing it well, that are taking the time to learn, the skills and the new content that you're putting out. I would say that speaking on an institution that had very low buy-in on just getting their faculty to understand why this is important. Um, they've now shifted completely to a lot of their courses are now under review by the faculty that, are producing them, as well as not just LMS, but other departments that are creating content, their library services, their HR, anybody that's kind of creating forms, digital signage, like these teams that are also responsible for being compliant. And the way that they kind of, again, baked this in and shifted it was they first just asked, what about this feels like you can't do it? What's hard? What's challenging? Just to, again, open the conversation. A lot of it was, I don't have the time. And so that's where then it was addressed. Okay, well, let's make it so that it's a self-paced module and, we're giving a 2-month window. If you get it done, you get, XYZ of, an award. I know that some people don't care about badges. So, you just have to kind of find what motivates your faculty. But they also built out a pretty extensive resource pool, and didn't just make it geared toward LMS. They thought about what are the, top 6 to 8 skills that are going to address accessibility issues that can also just be applicable universally. And so that way it almost shows your campus like it's not just our faculty, it's our staff as well. And everybody has a stake in this. And so I think just continuous, conversation around this. It's not just one email saying, here's a training, come if you can. It was that they had, their departments kind of champion with 1 or 2 people from a higher standpoint to say, okay, I'm here if you have questions, come, let's do like a working lunch, bring your content. I don't know what I'm doing, but we can figure it out together. I think if you just kind of plug in with those people, and they're going to be on your campus, you might have to hunt for them, but that's kind of my really nice. I hope this happens for you answer. Um,
We got another a comment come in from Rachel, and thanks for this as well. A note about mandatory training. We got buy-in for mandatory training by drawing a parallel between what we must do for Title IX and for Title II. That is, if federal law is a part of what we must follow, it's our responsibility to make sure our campus is at least aware of it. So looking at some of those kinds of opportunities. The other thing that we're doing as a team in the background, and maybe stay tuned for more on this depending on how it develops, is looking at trying to find ways to connect these accessibility requirements with accreditation requirements and trying to make, find sort of creative ways to make the accessibility trainings part of faculty in service days that might align to accreditation. So we're working on sort of mapping some of our training content and stuff to some of those opportunities to try and make it a little stickier. So keep an eye out for any news on that from the Edge side. Um, Moving on to some additional questions here. I think the aspect of planning and policy that is most difficult is figuring out who's responsible for things like auditing documents and enforcing that they be revised. How are other institutions handling this?
Yeah, I think that is probably the largest challenge that I'm hearing when I'm having these conversations with institutions. I would say that it generally starts with a conversation with leadership. So whether that's a board, your cabinet, maybe you have a leadership, task force around accessibility. You get all of those people in the room, and it has to come down to where is accessibility living on our institution, and start high level. So, all the departments that it kind of touches, and again, kind of having a point person within that department, and saying, okay, like you are the top, you have this amount of uh, leeway to make a decision, and if it's a bigger issue or a bigger, question that either you don't feel like you have the answer to or that you need additional support, here is one level above that you can go to. So just kind of creating that like tiered tree of accountability. Start at the top, work your way down until it does get to kind of the individual level, where you have your faculty and staff who are then accountable for their own content that they create. And it probably is going to look messy, because everybody overlaps in different areas. And so again, I think if you can have those champion point people, and give them the responsibility to say, you have the go ahead. This is kind of an okay place for you to make decisions. Set the boundaries, set the borders, and then just kind of work down. It's not one size fits all, because every institution kind of runs a little bit differently.
Yeah,
But yeah.
and this dovetails with another question that's come in that I think kind of shows the other side of that, and that everybody's going to operate a little differently. That who specifically is responsible if somebody complains about something inaccessible. My instructional design department can promote the need all the time, but we have many instructors or departments that just aren't making changes when they're needed. So what would we recommend in that scenario?
And so again, I think that that's where you really have to have the buy-in from your leadership. And that leadership has to provide some sort of control to department heads. And this is where your policy is going to be really strong, but also where your procedures really need to speak to as well, because that's going to give you that kind of framework and landscape toward showing like who are we going to? You're right, when something doesn't get done. And I think that I personally don't like to have, the heavy hammer of, well, that's just legal and, it's going to be on you if we get audited or if we get, a report against us. And so I don't have like I said, I don't have a one size answer for this. But I do think that conversations need to, and that's a great question to
Yeah.
bring to people to say, like, who is responsible? And I've seen at other institutions where they have that responsibility shared across a couple of different offices, a couple of different departments. So, it might look like your student services who kind of answer and provide all the support for student accommodations. It might look like a shared responsibility with your offices of disabilities. Like, so it's just going to be not necessarily maybe sitting with one person or one team. It's going to, and that's where this, breaking down of the silos, I think is where I've seen the most shift happen toward the culture change,
Yeah.
and having these conversations across your institution and not just with your instructional design team. And
Yeah.
honestly, I'm an instructional designer. I've seen it for years now. It cannot solely live on the ID. They can provide that one-time fix, but they can't change a faculty's practice, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a really long-winded answer.
Well, and I mean, I think in all that, and to your point, like everybody's going to be a little different. Sometimes, you prefer the carrot approach to the stick approach, but so, in some places
But you
the
gotta have the stick.
right,
I mean, I don't
gotta
know, like swing it
right, you
around a little bit.
gotta have it there sometimes, and part of the carrot and part of the policy and procedure being in place and being clear and being easy to use is that for those who are resistant, at least you're taking that roadblock away of the difficulty of not knowing how to remediate it. So the better and the easier to use policies and procedures are, the more likely, compliance may be. So that's the other side of it, I think. So we have a couple questions come in, and I'll group a couple of these together because they're related to vendor resources and vendor platforms. So um, the first being, how can we get vendors to stop generating inaccessible products in the first place so that remediation, especially for screen reading, is not necessary? I'll add here that a couple of EdgeCons ago, we had a panel that included exclusively vendors, and we very rarely do that, but we did that because we made the topic of the panel, how do you get the most out of vendors and how do you get them to do what you need them to do? And we got some really I think open and honest conversation. And the thing that moves the needle for them is the bottom line and making it clear that those sorts of requirements are essential to the bottom line and to you guys cutting a check. And the other thing being that, and take this for the grain of salt that might come with it, but that they really want to be open to those kinds of discussions, that they feel like um, very often uh, institutions will get together in forums like this and ask these kinds of questions, but they don't always bring them back to the vendor themselves and talk about how important it is, how global of a challenge that it is, and how all institutions really need them to take these kinds of actions. So I think the more they can hear that from us in as many ways as you can put that across as we don't all have time to hit a contact form and also hit a salesperson and also hit somebody else. But the more ways that you can put those concerns across to the vendors and really focus on the vendors who are core to what you're doing and where the accessibility challenges are, I think the better off. And they sat there in front of an audience of 250 of our members and said, we want you to bring these things to us as often and in as many ways as you can. So I would encourage, everybody to do that, certainly. And then the other side of this, Laura, is a practical and logistics question. My office needs to provide reporting on the accessibility status of our procurements, websites, and courses, plus vendor documentation. Seeking an accessible platform or solution that can give this info to our campus liaisons and give them resources to solve issues. So, are there any recommendations? Have you seen a platform that's able to centralize this sort of documentation and share it across campus? Or is that something that I'm sure we can do some research on and report back to the group if we haven't seen it yet?
Yeah, so one other thing that I do want to plug about how do we kind of hold vendors responsible. I will second what Adam was saying that having the conversation with the vendor is the first step, right? So if you already are aware of issues of not meeting, accessible compliance, then that would be one. You are responsible as well for documenting this, and then for also saying we reached out to the vendor. This was their response, and so that way you're protecting yourself as well. But there are vendors that are easier to work with than others that I have been a part of this work for. Some just say our content is accessible. I'm not sure what you're talking about. And you can screenshot and say, oh, but it's not. This is causing an issue still, for whatever the tool that's being used, whether it's, for the disability or just for easier access and use. That then doesn't meet the compliance standard. But all of that to say, having the conversation with the vendor is one, going to protect your institution for documentation purposes, and two, also opening up the conversation for them to start becoming more aware and advocating for this. I think that because of the legality of kind of where we are with accessibility, a lot more vendors are trying to move the needle in the right direction. Like I said, some aren't, and maybe it's just because they haven't seen the repercussions. I'm not sure. I wish I could say, let's wave our magic wands at everybody and make them do the work. Because it is frustrating. But yeah, cover yourselves, have the conversations, and they might or might not be open for hearing what needs to
So,
be. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
And on the platform side, I think we'll maybe take that offline and be able to report on that afterwards. Because I do want to I think we have time for probably two more questions. And I want to get to this one here. Um, uh, what's your advice for situations when a faculty member is more likely to pull helpful content out of the LMS and out of the course, whether that's videos or images, etc., rather than make them accessible due to the time and effort needed? And here, Laura, before I let you jump in, I will once more plug Michelle and Aaron and getting to these guys if you have any questions or support, because one of the things that Laura's team, and I'm going to pump up Laura and her team because I don't know if she'll do it herself. Um, but one of the things that they are exceedingly good at, and one of the places we've seen institutions sort of use us to really good effect on a tactical basis, is to just be an extra resource to be able to come in and do that stuff so that faculty, we can take as much of that burden off of faculty's shoulders, because we have seen and we've heard from member institutions that, yeah, they're more likely to just leave a piece of content behind rather than make it accessible. And we know it takes them a long time. We know they don't feel like experts in it, but we have experts in it that we make available at affordable nonprofit rates, and they can jump in and do some of this remediation that is, honestly a little more tedious and a little more tactical. But we're able to do that so that your faculty and your institutional instructional designers can stay more focused on the bigger picture. So that's the one plug that I'll make for Laura and her team and the work that they do. Laura, I don't know if you have anything sort of more policy or engagement focused that you wanna touch on for that question before we move on.
Um, to be honest, I forgot the question.
Advice for situations where a faculty member is more likely to pull
Right, right,
content
right,
out of
right.
the
Okay,
LMS
thank
than
you.
make the
Okay,
changes.
so first of all, thank you for your kind words. I think they threw me off. So I would say that I've seen this in the past, where, we're requesting XYZ to be compliant, and faculty members like, fine, I'll make my course as boring as I can because I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
And then, of course, to the detriment of the student learning experience. So I would, one, address that and say, understand that this is a time commitment. And maybe they just, again, it feels very overwhelming because they have a lot of content. Maybe they don't know what accessible looks like. And so possibly just having that conversation of, let's look at your highest trafficked documents. Like, let's look at your syllabus first. That's going to be the one that students are repetitively going back to all semester. We can remediate it together. And I understand that whoever is going to have to do this, it's going to be extra on their plate as well. So my recommendation would be possibly create a how-to guide, maybe a quick video demo of you walking through correcting a syllabus, putting it up on a shared resources platform for all of your faculty, so that if anybody is feeling in the same position, maybe they're just not being vocal about it. They have that there to again fill that knowledge gap. And then two, outside of, you maybe helping them prioritize what to look at first, building up that resource for them to say, okay, if you're adding captions to your videos, this is how you do it. There are some great platforms that make it easier. We're happy to share offline as well. But I think my general sense of when a faculty member comes to you and says this, it's less about them not, well, I hope so. It's less about them not caring about their students, but more about, they've just got so much else going on and maybe they don't know even where to start. And so giving that, maybe a little bit of a handhold, extra training, them knowing that they have the support available, the attitude might change. So
Yeah. Okay. So I think unfortunately that's going to bring us to time because we do have a hard stop. So we do have a couple more questions that we didn't get to. What we will do is review those as a team. We'll look to write up some answers and distribute them out along with the link to the recording, and you'll be able to request a PDF of the slides too. So we'll do our best to answer those questions offline. Try and respond directly to the folks who asked them as well, but we'll also distribute it because I'm sure if one person's got the question, more than one does too. So we'll take a look at that and follow up. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, for spending the time with us. We know how valuable your time is, and we really appreciate you going over time with us here. Laura, thanks for your time and expertise as always. Anything you want to end with and wrap up with?
I mean, honestly, I'll just close with thank you for putting this work as a priority in your schedule today. That shows that you care, and it shows that you're diligent about making sure that our students, our faculty. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I keep saying
Yeah.
it over and over again. You're just making the experience of everybody that's on your institution so much better by considering their needs. And I don't know, just what a good human. So anyway.
It's important work, and that's why we're so invested in making sure we're able to help institutions do it too. So yeah, thanks for spending the time with us, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of the afternoon and rest of the week. And again, reach out if you have any questions at all, if you want to follow up, if your institution needs support. We're always here to help. That's why Edge exists. So thanks again for the time, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.